Bitcoin not only has the potential to be new digital gold, it also has the potential to completely revamp our financial system.
Why all these people believe in Bitcoin?
If you have 0.1 or 0.2 Bitcoin, you're already one of the top hodlers. Nobody can manipulate the supply, and nobody can take your money away.
If you want to invest in something, buy Bitcoin. This is easiest, the simplest, and the most profitable strategy.
I don't even want Bitcoin to reach $1 million this year. The main use case, use it to save financial energy. Put a little bit in there because you don't want to be the last person on the Titanic and not having anything in Bitcoin.
Hello everyone, nice to see you. This is a new episode of Headliners, and today we are talking about Bitcoin. I have a guest, Robin, who interviewed more than 400 different people for the last 14 months talking about Bitcoin. So, Robin, I want to ask you the first question. What is your expectations about Bitcoin at the moment? Or maybe the second one, what did you learn from all these podcasts during the last 14 months?
That's an amazing question because like the learnings from the podcast, if you can imagine 400 different people talking about one single topic, it's not crypto, it's not finance, it's just Bitcoin. You learn a lot about Bitcoin. You learn a lot about where Bitcoin might go. You learn a lot about how do you secure Bitcoin properly. You learn where Bitcoin is coming from, where it is right now, and where kind of Bitcoin will lead the way in the future, what impact Bitcoin might have on society down the road if Bitcoin is successful, if Bitcoin fulfills his theory. So this alone is like a huge things where I'm trying to actually right now kind of write down all the learnings, all the things that I've learned from all those 400 guests. If I just like give one headline where Bitcoin is going, I think Bitcoin will be what the TCP/IP protocol is for the internet. It's like the base layer of our monetary system where you then can build all the things on top of it. As most people are aware, the Bitcoin base layer is quite restricted. So not everyone will be on a base layer. Mostly big institutions will be on a base layer. A transaction will cost like 1,000 euros or like maybe 10,000 euros or something like that. So you need then an ecosystem on top of Bitcoin. And that's what I'm really focusing on Bitcoin of like, what is that base layer? Why is that base layer the number one base layer? And what is then being built on top of Bitcoin? And what is then the impact of having Bitcoin as sound money versus having a fiat system, which we currently have? So that's kind of my main focus. And from there, we even talk about parenting, about fitness, about nutrition. Like I'm talking about solely about Bitcoin, but Bitcoin touches so many different topics that it really is about everything in the end of the day.
You know, what is the main use case for the Bitcoin right now at the moment from your perspective?
Store value. Like, yes, people use it to transact here and there. There's El Salvador. Even I get paid in Bitcoin currently. Most of my income, actually, I sometimes pay people in Bitcoin. I have restaurants here in Vienna where I can pay burgers in Bitcoin. So yes, medium of exchange exists for Bitcoin, but the main use case, like 99.999% of all Bitcoiners use it to save financial energy. That's the main use case. And that's why Bitcoin is valuable. Bitcoin is not valuable because you can send it around. Otherwise, fiat would be very valuable, but it's not. It's devaluing all the time. The value and the growth of Bitcoin, especially the Bitcoin price, comes from it being a store of value because people love the aspect of like nobody can manipulate the supply. Nobody can take your money away. I talked with so many people on my podcast that got thrown out of their bank account. They had a business account, they had a personal account, savings account, 2-3 different banks, and they got kicked out and rejected of that fiat system at one day because they got one transaction in their bank account. All of a sudden it got flagged and 2 different bank accounts got all of a sudden frozen. And that's happening in the Western world. So I don't even know what's happening in Africa and other countries where people don't even have bank accounts. They cannot even get thrown out, where Bitcoin gives them the possibility to have a bank account basically in cyberspace, and you can opt in this bank account with a phone and internet connection, which is really funny to see that there are more people that have access to a smartphone with internet connection than there are people with bank accounts. So I think that's the main use case for Bitcoin. Also like the transaction that you can send around the world, but then there's also stable coins that kind of can facilitate that. So the main use case is that Nobody can manipulate this supply, and that's the main use case. And all the other things with layer 2 and lightning and liquid and Fediments, this is right now a nice to have and might be really crucial and essential in 10, 20, 50 years from now.
Do you use any stable coins on a daily basis? Because for me, it sounds strange that you receive payments in a Bitcoin or you pay employee in a Bitcoin. Because for me, I use stable coins mostly, not the Bitcoin.
I use Bitcoin directly because it's just like I have a Bitcoin business. I like saving in Bitcoin, and every time I have to transact in USDC or USD, and I have to then convert it or go through some exchange, or like there's always something going on. And if I save in Bitcoin, the best way is directly getting the Bitcoin into my wallet. Then I don't have to transact between layers, transact between coins, transact within an exchange where maybe there's like a 1% fee involved and stuff like that. So because I save all my money in Bitcoin and I only have an operational monetary account with euros, I don't need at all anything else than that. I get the use case of a stable coin. But for me, it makes most sense to get it directly native in the token that I will also then save in. So then I don't have to switch around between things and can save on the transaction fees and brokerage fees and stuff like that.
But how does it happen? How you became some type of Bitcoin maximalist? Because me personally, I do not met so many people who are Bitcoin focused only guys, and I'm inspired with your story. How did you start this Bitcoin journey?
I started off with Bitcoin, then I naturally went into Ethereum, into some crypto gaming tokens. At some point I had Solana, Cardano, like other tokens also along the way. So I had my altcoin phase definitely within the first year. Maybe let's start a little bit earlier. I was always a really saving type of a person. And when I was like 18, 19 years old, for the reference, I'm now 26 years old. When I was 18, 19 years old, I first got into stocks and ETFs and all those things because I was like, I have some money, I should do something with that. And from that perspective, I was then coming into Bitcoin when I was 21 years old. I came from, I should diversify. I should not only hold one stock. I had multiple tech stocks. I had multiple different stocks to diversify between industries. So I had that mindset of, let's not just put everything on to one asset, on one horse. I should diversify a little bit. But then I came into Bitcoin and I did the same strategy. And then I learned of okay, I understand slowly why Bitcoin. The first part was understanding that an asset doesn't need a cash flow. I was a stock guy, so I needed a cash flow to calculate PE ratios, to see the management team. There's no PE ratio with Bitcoin. There's no management team with Bitcoin. There's no foundation with Bitcoin. There's like nothing. It's just a coin. So it looked weird for me because I needed that fixation of like a foundation or something like that. So that was the first thing where I'm like, okay, what is this Bitcoin thing even? And then the first kind of debates and the first kind of discussions brought me towards its digital gold. Then it made a little bit more sense of like, okay, gold is like, back then it was a $10 trillion market. Now it's, I think, 20 trillion, like it doubled, I think, in the time since I'm in Bitcoin. And then it was like, okay, if it's digital gold, it makes more sense because gold, there's also no management team. There's also no marketing team or CEO or foundation or anything behind that. There's also no PE ratio. Gold has no yield. Gold has no cash flow. So I came into Bitcoin then with that and thought of like, oh, it's an interesting diversifier for my portfolio. It's something I could add to gain exposure to the crypto and also have maybe the potential new digital gold coin. So that was my initial thought of Bitcoin. But then I researched and I kind of came to the conclusion Bitcoin not only has the potential to be the new digital gold, it also has the potential to completely revamp our financial system and be the base, as I said in the beginning, TCP/IP protocol, for the financial system, where everything else is then built on top of it. And that's the base network and also the base token for that. And then I kind of was so fascinated by the theory of like, maybe Bitcoin is the sole financial system for our whole species, that I'm really focused more and more on the Bitcoin. I sold more and more altcoins, I sold more and more stocks. And I think 2021 was this time where I focused solely on purely on Bitcoin because of the things that I mentioned before. And it's interesting when you talk about one only thing, because right now we have so many different currencies, we have so many different assets, we have so many different stocks, and then it's like, but why would there only be one? And then when you look at the history of money, there's always weaker and stronger currencies, there's always weaker and stronger monies. And I do believe that we will come to a point where we move up the civilization level and we will have one singular money. So like there's a singularity of the monetary system where we go into one. And that's just basically my theory around Bitcoin being that one system, the one asset, that one network that we will be built on top of it. And that's basically what I'm getting at with Bitcoin.
Wow. This is excited because, I'm in crypto field for the several years. Maybe started from the first touch. My touch was in 2017, but I have never ever think about all this field and about the Bitcoin like this. So this is really inspired, And about your guests, you have 400 different people. Do you have any common vision of the Bitcoin? Because it looks like for the different person, Bitcoin is a different thing. But what is maybe the most common idea? Why all these people believe in Bitcoin, or why do they use it, or something like this?
That's something that's really hard to answer, but I'm trying my best because there's so many different people. And there are people that believe that, as I said, Bitcoin will be the singularity of money and will also push away any fiat currencies.
What is the timeline? What is the timeline for this singularity of money? What do you think? What is your expectations?
I think that's a quite long time. And we want it to be a long time. If you think about the fiat system as a broken ship, like the fiat system is, let's say, the Titanic, and we hit the iceberg, we have so much monetary expansion that the dollar and all the other currencies, like the dollar is the best one, but all the other ones are even worse than that. They are sinking faster and faster. We want that process happen as slowly as possible, because we are simply not ready to onboard everyone on Bitcoin. Like if we have tomorrow from, let's say, 100, 200, 300 million people on Bitcoin, all of a sudden 8 billion people on Bitcoin, that's not working out. Like we don't have the applications, we don't have the ecosystem. Like Bitcoin needs more time to build out all the layer 2, layer 3 stuff. Bitcoin, the base layer is ready because it has mechanism to deal with those things. So the base layer will not break if everyone now comes to Bitcoin. But the layer 2, the lightnings, the liquids, the fediments, those things I think will break when now all of a sudden 8 billion people come in. So we do want the fiat system to slowly and gradually die, and this Titanic sink as slow as humanly possible, that people have the chance to really move to that system. Think about your grandma all of a sudden having to self-custody Bitcoin. We need banks in order to take care of those people. We need custody solutions. We need borrowing and lending on top of Bitcoin. These are all things that are currently in development, and there's already like Firefish, Nexo, Latin. There's so many different apps that you can already use for this financial platforming. But it's not yet ready for a mass market. And when you look at all those things, you want the fiat system to go down slowly so the Bitcoin system can grow organically. I don't even want Bitcoin to reach $1 million this year. That it's possible. I don't think it's happening, but if it's growing too fast, it might actually break a lot of layer 2 things and layer 3 things. And it also means that the fiat system is breaking really fast. And sometimes there are Bitcoin maxis, they say like, oh, like go down the fiat system, it will break in 3-5 years. And I'm kind of disagreeing with that. And I don't want that to happen, because this also means that your uncle, your grandma, your friends that are not yet onto the new system, they will suffer a lot. Imagine even if someone is rich and they have a lot of money, they will still suffer because they relied on that fiat system for all their life, and now all of a sudden it's gone. So it will go away at some point, but it will take decades over decades to really unfold, and that's a good thing. We don't want the fiat system to die too fast, if you understand what I'm trying to.
It's interesting because I have never think about this. I mean, where did you get all these beliefs and ideas? It comes to you when you start to dig deeply into the idea of the Bitcoin.
I gained a lot of knowledge the last year with my podcast. I already was a Bitcoiner. I was already Bitcoin only before I started the podcast. But the really strong belief around Bitcoin and around everything else and the free market, I'm called myself also a free market maximalist, that really comes with the podcast, with all the guests and with all the different views on top of Bitcoin. Before I started the podcast, I kind of had the belief of like, okay, Bitcoin, I have to fight for Bitcoin. I have to do something for Bitcoin. I'm now more relaxed because I now know Bitcoin doesn't need me. Bitcoin doesn't want me. I want Bitcoin and I need Bitcoin. And it will exist. Like, there's nothing I can say to make Bitcoin go higher or lower. I'm such a small thing inside of Bitcoin. Maybe a Donald Trump can move it. Maybe a Elon Musk can move it. Like maybe really big people with a lot of resources and a lot of influence, they can still move it to a certain extent. But even those, the influence of those really big people are getting less and less. So I kind of have that peace of mind now of like, I know where Bitcoin is coming from. I know what Bitcoin is. I verified the Bitcoin myself. I can see where it is going, and I can really be relaxed of like, okay, like that's how I think the world is playing out. And there's no management team that can run around and do something wrong. Like if you are invested in Tesla stock, and I'm a big believer in Tesla, I was a big investor in Tesla, and I love the company. I love what they're doing with AI. I love what they're doing with full self-driving. But if we're honest, this can all go to zero. Like Tesla can go to zero over 1-2 years if the management team is doing big mistakes, if there's some Chinese company doing a better job in manufacturing AI and stuff like that. There's competition going on. Bitcoin is a commodity. Bitcoin is the base layer where there is no management team or CEO that can go in a wrong direction. It's the peace of mind that I got from a podcast with all the guests, and we can dive into like why this is and why I believe that. But the full peace of mind of like, yeah, I have everything in Bitcoin, and when I get euros, when I get other assets, I cannot sleep because I have to convert it fast as possible to Bitcoin, because that's the only asset I even feel safe of having. If I have a real estate property, I know that politicians in the local area can sorry for, you can cut that out if you...
It's okay.
They can up my neighborhood. I can get a bad neighbor. There can be a tornado. There can be some... Of course, you can pay insurance for that, but then you have to pay insurance and stuff like that. So there's always all the other assets. If you look at them long enough, you figure out ways where someone else can manipulate or can make your investment a little bit worse. So then it's like, okay, Bitcoin, nobody can manipulate anything in Bitcoin. We had 2017, the block size war. I think the block size war was probably the single greatest event that happened in Bitcoin history to show how resilient the user base is of Bitcoin. And they didn't want to increase the block size of Bitcoin. There was over 90% of the miners wanted to have bigger blocks. There was really big people and influential Bitcoiners in the Bitcoin space back then that were pushing for that. But the users, the full node runners, they were like, no, that's destroying long-term our security of the Bitcoin layer. And if we increase it a little bit, we will still run in the same problems of having too small of a blocks and not having enough transactions per second. So we either have to completely destroy the security on the base layer in order to get more transactions in, or we keep the security of the base layer and move the scalability on layer twos. And technology always scales in layers. If you know, the TCP/IP protocol is the first layer, and then there's 7 layers on top of that, and you interact on the 7th layer with Facebook and all the applications on the application layer. The block size war was the single greatest event, I think, that gave me confidence in Bitcoin and the resilience in Bitcoin, where even an attack within the Bitcoin industry, with all the miners, with all the money, with all the influential people, were pushing for one thing, but the decentralized nature of Bitcoin with the full nodes, this actually won out against the corporations, against the miners, against the influential people. And there are definitely people that see it differently than me, but I think the free market kind of had decided which one is more powerful. And that's great also with Bitcoin. Like if you have a fork and because people say to me like, oh, I love Bitcoin, but I would improve that. Like, and then improve it. Like you can copy the code, make a fork of it, and then see how many people adopt your Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is open source. You can copy it today and change one thing, give it a new name, and try if people actually like it. The Blocksize Wars kind of showed us where Bitcoin Cash came out. In the beginning, even, it was really fun to see. Like in the beginning, it actually looked like Bitcoin Cash is the winner and Bitcoin is kind of going down. But then over time, the free market ruled and people are like, no, like I don't want to jeopardize my security of the Bitcoin. That's why I'm in Bitcoin. So now if you look at the charts, like Bitcoin Cash is down massively and Bitcoin is talked about with the president and all the things. So the resilience of Bitcoin is kind of like what makes it so amazing to see. If I talked yesterday with former UFC fighter Kenny Florian, who's also a Bitcoiner, and he talked about that concept of having an asset that is in the defense good. And he talked about when you fight against someone, you want to be really good in the defense. Like anything they throw at you, you can counteract when you be a fighter. And he talked about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm not an expert in that, but he talked about that concept of it's so important that we have the defense right. And Bitcoin is the most defensive and most conservative asset that we have on the planet. If I talk with crypto people, they actually get it. Like if someone is in altcoins, they get it when I say it's a conservative and defensive asset. When I talk with normal traditional finance people, they're like, no, Bitcoin is so risky. And so it's like interesting when depends on who you talk to, they agree or disagree on that. But Bitcoin is the most resilient asset against all others. That's the interesting part for me because I just want to work, provide value for the community, provide value with products and services with my companies, and then get paid in that and just want to park my money in one asset. It's such a peace of mind where I don't do anything with credit. I don't do anything with different investments. I don't do anything with real estate. I literally earn money and save it in Bitcoin, which then makes me able to focus fully on my work and on my family and on my friends. That's why I want, and all of the sports and myself and all the things, the rest of it, but I can focus on life. And that's why before Bitcoin, I was in stocks. I was a stock hustler. I was researching smaller stocks, like mid-cap stocks and all the things. And it was a full-time job. And that's the thing also with altcoins. Yes, there are great gains in there and people use altcoins to get more Bitcoin in the end of the day. Most of them that I talk to, but maybe there's a different crowd out there. And I'm always like, but why do you spend all that time to research different projects, research different tokens? They might be really good. Maybe they fulfill a market. I just want to make my work. I just want to provide value for community and then save my financial energy in the most safest asset that I ever saw. And that gives me peace of mind to have more time with my family, with my friends. And I don't have to listen to Q1s and Q2 reports from like Tesla and MicroStrategy. I rather just listen to what my girlfriend is saying. I listen to what my friends are saying and hang out with them before I research stocks. And I had fun doing that. I might do that in the future again. I think it's a better way to provide value and then save that value into one asset that you really like.
This is interesting. During all this during your speech, I want to ask you about, let's call it Bitcoin family. It looks like you have a lot of conversations with the guys who already believe in the same things with you. Does this Bitcoin maximalist or Bitcoin holder idea helps you to build new communication with the people or not?
Absolutely. Like it's super easy because like I only have Bitcoin only companies to partner up with and to make the sponsorships. I only have Bitcoiners. I mean, to my podcast also, a lot of people listen to my podcast that have altcoins also. I actually asked it like 1 or 2 weeks ago in my community on YouTube and asked like, oh, I know you have Bitcoin if you watch a daily Bitcoin podcast, but do you have also other coins? And around 55% actually answered with like, yes, I have altcoins. I have some other cryptocurrencies also. Most of them said they have it to get more Bitcoin. They try to gain with the altcoin season, which I'm not perfectly sure if it will actually happen this time around, but they try to gain with the altcoin season more Bitcoin in the end of the day, which is a fair game. Like it's a free market. Like, as I said, I'm a free market maximalist. Everyone can do with their money whatever they want to do, but it definitely improves and is easier for the communication for the podcast also. I have Bitcoin as a topic. I have a very easy marketing of like, I'm the daily Bitcoin podcast. There's no other daily Bitcoin podcast out there that does only Bitcoin. And every single day has a different interview out there. It's just literally without competition. And then the guests know what they're getting into. There's a Bitcoin conversation happening. I don't have pre-talks with my guests because yes, we were talking about Bitcoin and there's no script going on or something like that. So basically it's super, super straightforward. And it's also very, very easy to have just one topic. Maybe in the future, I'm getting into other topics. Maybe the podcast evolves. But currently, Bitcoin is super exciting with all the things going on, with the United States possibly buying it and stuff like that. So there's really a lot of things going on, which makes it super interesting. And I was actually afraid in the beginning of the podcast if I can even do it on a daily basis.
That's what I want to ask, really, because do it on a daily basis is quite hard.
Yeah, I had two concerns basically. I had one concern was it will be boring after some time. And the second concern was, are there enough interesting people to talk to? I was not like, is the Bitcoin only crowd so deep? And both questions like, yes, it's definitely so deep, and no, it's actually not getting boring. I mean, sometimes I have a conversation where I'm like, okay, this guest is not as interesting, but it's really rare where I'm like bored in my own podcast, and I usually don't publish those podcasts. And it's really a rare instance. Like I have like 10 or 15 podcasts that I did not publish because it was just not interesting enough from like 400. It's interesting how you can connect also Bitcoin to so many other topics. I talked with one guest around parenting most of the times of the podcast. We touched on Bitcoin, but then we went on and talked about parenting and how they use Bitcoin in that, and how the Bitcoin way of parenting is homeschooling. So we talked a lot about those things. So diet is something that we also talk about. Yesterday, as mentioned, with the UFC fighter, we talked about sports and fighting and swimming and all those things. So there are naturally other topics coming up along the way, but it's focused on Bitcoin most of the times, and then other topics come in because of that. For example, yesterday I did 2 recordings, one with the UFC fight and another one with Eric Semler from Semler Scientific. They recently bought a bunch of Bitcoin. I think they're now top 10 companies of holding Bitcoin on their balance sheets. What was it? I think like $100 million they raised and directly bought Bitcoin with that, with their recent convertible bond offering, which is a fascinating thing what the companies currently are doing. And I talked with him, and in the end of the podcast, we even talked about what implications Bitcoin will have for African women that weren't previously allowed to spend money without their husbands. And now they can spend their money, because Bitcoin is permissionless and you don't need a banking system that is maybe akin to old traditional values. So it's super fascinating to go deep on different Bitcoin topics. And so far, after around 400 podcasts, I can still say it's not boring. Maybe this changes after like 1,000 conversations.
Wow. How do you choose guests for the podcasts? Because now you have a recommendation from the previous guests. It looks like it must go in like this. Because in the other way, I have no idea how to find so many people.
There are different ways. The main way is actually currently guests are bringing on new guests. Like I never ask guests of like, oh, do you know someone that you can bring on? What they do is like, oh, I was on the podcast, was really cool. And I know that other person and he should really be on your podcast. Robin, do you want to have him on? This happens a lot of the times. There are even people coming from themselves. Like people are having like, maybe they just written a book and they want to promote the book, or they have some articles, or they're like, hey, I want to be on the podcast and share that thought with the audience. So like around, I would say 50% around that, either coming from themselves or coming from a different guest. And then I'm on conferences. I meet people there and people come to me on conferences like, hey, can I be on the podcast? Or I ask them, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? Then there are the high level guests like a Michael Saylor or Seyfried Moose, or like the bigger ones. Those I try to reach out to and try to get on my podcast with Twitter. I'm just reaching out on X of like, hey, do you want to be on podcast? I would be honored to have you. That's usually working out. It's like really rarely that someone is not responding because they are Bitcoin only focused. I'm Bitcoin only focused. And like the focus makes also the guest invite so much easier. Then things that I also do is like, I just put a tweet out of like, hey, who do you want me to have on the podcast? Then there's usually like 20 recommendations. I DM them and usually like I get from one tweet, 10, 20 new guests. So then I have another few for another few weeks. There are many ways, but actually it kind of goes on its own now. I still don't have an Excel sheet with all the guests where I'm like doing it organized. I should do that and I will do that, but right now it's all in my head. And then another thing happens where guests that were previously on want to be on a second time. This is obviously then bringing more options into the podcast. So the concern that there are not enough people is completely, I have a Twitter list that I have where I'm like, if I see someone interesting, I put it on that Twitter list. And it's still, I think like 200 or 300 people on there that I haven't reached out yet. And I want to have them on my podcast just because there's so many coming from themselves that I've not really reached out to any one of those. So it kind of, now that the podcast is big enough and the podcast is known enough in the Bitcoin only community, it kind of goes without putting a lot of efforts actually.
I like this idea to become the number one in the field of Bitcoin. This sounds like a plan. How do you use Twitter for this? Like you publish every video on a YouTube and then you write some thoughts on a Twitter. What is the main use case of the Twitter for you?
Twitter is for me a marketing and networking tool. I use Twitter for 3 different things. The first thing I use Twitter for is to network with other Bitcoiners. It's a great networking tool where you can just write like, hey, let's hang out, hey, let's do that project. Or just make a Twitter of like, for example, I needed my first employee. So I wrote on Twitter like, hey, I'm offering payment in Bitcoins. Do you know someone that wants to help me? Or do you want yourself to help me on the podcast? I got on the first day 60 applications for that position just with one tweet. It's definitely a networking tool and a marketing tool. That's really cool. And I also use Twitter to just dump my thoughts that I have around Bitcoin on there. Like if I have a random thought on Bitcoin, I just put it on Twitter and then it's kind of a way for me to see, is that thought that resonates with people? Maybe if it resonates with people, I might include it in an article or blog or like something in my book that I'm currently working on. So I can test ideas out. Twitter is a really cool platform because even if you have like 10,000 followers or like 100,000 followers and you have a shitty tweet, it will not get far, except you're like Elon Musk, like or like some really famous. Like if you're really famous and you just put anything in there, it probably gets far. But if you have a middle following, like 10, 50, 100K people, and you just post something that is not resonating with people, it will not get far. But on the flip side, even if you have just like 200 followers and it's a tweet that just hits, it can reach 1 million people. So Twitter is a really great platform just to dump like 2-3 sentences on there and see how it goes and test out ideas, possible topics for the podcast also, and use it as kind of an idea place. But also networking marketing is the main use case for me for Twitter. I also post the full podcast on Twitter, but most people don't watch on Twitter. They see it on Twitter and then switch to Spotify, to Rumble, to YouTube, to any other platform that the full podcast is on.
How do you gain your first audience in Twitter? you created a new Twitter account, or you used your previous one that you owned for the years?
I had a previous one, but it had like 100 followers, so it was almost like a new one. I created the Twitter account a year actually before my podcast. And when I started the podcast, I already had like, I think 6,000-7,000 followers in the Bitcoin only space for the podcast, which was a great starting point, made the guest invites easier. And I just started with posting a lot of tweets. I did, I think, 5 to 6 tweets per day. I don't do it yet, do it now, but I did it in the starting of like just putting out 5 to 6 tweets every day to see what kind of resonates with people and what doesn't resonate with people. And it grew really rapidly. Within 1 year, from 0 to 7,000 followers. Now I'm in my second year, like I think 2 years and like 4 months. I'm now onto Twitter. I have like around 18,000 followers now on Twitter. So it's still growing, even though I don't do that much anymore. But because it's my main networking tool, so if anyone wants to reach out to me, they just go on Twitter, Robin Syer, and they put it in, and then they can reach out to me. I still read all my DMs. I still read all my mentions, because usually there are like new guests or something interesting in there, and I can use it for the podcast, and I use it that way. It's really interesting how integrated the Bitcoin system is with Twitter. There's also things like Nostra and protocols like that, but most people are on Twitter.
How do you usually open your podcasts?
I don't have an opening routine, but I have an end routine, because usually we talk about Bitcoin, and at the end of the podcast, I ask my guest always, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin? That's always my end routine, because then we get other things outside of Bitcoin also in there. That's the only question that I always ask. All the other things are always tailored to the guest. Like that's always like, I'm trying to always tailor and try to get it towards the guest. And never something where I'm like, okay, that I always do. People complain that I don't do like a guest introduction. I don't do that. I think that's sometimes just...
Yeah, nobody need it. I get it, yeah.
So, but I usually try to get individual questions. What usually currently is in there is like, okay, where do you see Bitcoin currently? How did you get into Bitcoin? Like those are things that I usually touch on somewhere around the podcast, or they come naturally on. Like if you talk about Bitcoin, usually talk like, okay, how do you see Bitcoin currently? And then I also try to always get the future perspective on like, where do you see Bitcoin going? What do you see? But there's different topics with different people. For example, there are maybe people that talk about how to secure Bitcoin. They talk of multi-signature, custody and stuff like that, where we don't talk about Bitcoin's future development at all. Then there are people that work maybe in the government or maybe have some connections there. Then we talk about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's different with every person. But I'm curious to know for you how you see Bitcoin, because I talked a lot about how I see Bitcoin and where my Bitcoin thoughts is coming from. But you have many other assets, as I assume also. How do you see Bitcoin evolving, and where do you see Bitcoin going, and where maybe interesting is like, where do you see the full potential of Bitcoin for the coming years, if there is something like that?
Thanks for the question. Interesting. Wilbur, I have never ever thought about it. I'm more focused on a cash flow business with USDT as a main currency. I cannot say that I invest a lot in a Bitcoin, because I'm on my way to gain a capital. So my goal is to gain around $40 million. And I think that Bitcoin, yes, is the safest one, like a real estate, but the longest way. That's why I put more in Ethereum or other things, because I think that some of the altcoins, they maybe have some more upside potential in case of the price. I cannot understand why we do not grow so fast after we hit 100,000. Because from the economical side, I understood your strategy 100%, because if you invest in Bitcoin, if you have all the transactions in Bitcoin, it means that you believe in it. So, but for me, I try to analyze. So I think I have more financial motivation than a beliefs here. And in that case, I do not understand why on all these positive news positive media narrative, etc., we do not grow upper, I don't know, to the 150, etc. So for me, it means that somebody sold it right now, here in the moment. But for the long-term perspective, I think that Bitcoin is great. And I also have a small fund for my kids that I put some amount of money every month to this fund to store some money in a Bitcoin, but not so deep, something like this. I cannot say that I am a big fan of the blockchain industry at all, because I think that we had a lot of technical solutions that are made from one blockchain to help another blockchain to integrate with a third blockchain. So this is more like, I know, like doing something for something that nobody has a real use case. That's from my side. So for me, all the crypto field, also including Bitcoin, is more about speculation mostly. But I like the idea that it can be, this is a gold, this is a digital gold. That's why I store some of the money on it. I can say you about my current strategy. If you want to invest in something, buy Bitcoin. Come to you and tell, hey, let's do this or do this, invest in a Bitcoin. I think investing in Bitcoin on the long term, this is the easiest, the simplest, and the most profitable strategy. Maybe after our discussion, I need to change some of my thoughts, because I'm always try to be open-minded. And I always try to listen people to catch some of the ideas and to learn more. That's the answer. Maybe because that's where I am now.
Interesting, because we are super early and most people, like I am a complete outlier. I am someone that is in a field where only a few people are, where they are completely, fully focused on Bitcoin. I'm getting my money in Bitcoin. Like I'm a complete outlier. Just like if you have 0.1 or 0.2 Bitcoin, you're already one of the top hodlers. Like most people have almost no money in Bitcoin. If you have a whole coin or like 2 or 10 coins or something like that, you are one of the top Bitcoin hodlers. When you look at that, you see how freaking early we are in that. Yes, I do understand the frustration of like, I also thought once we reached 100K and then also the strategic Bitcoin reserve talks are coming in, we will easily go to 150K very quickly. Similar how we went from 10K to instantly 17K, but things sometimes take longer. And if you look at the performance of Bitcoin in the last year, it's still amazing. But I do see also that there are a lot of people seeing 100K as a top signal, and then they are selling, there's sell orders going on. But this can only happen for a short or medium period of time. This can only happen for so long. If there's so many companies buying it, if there are now nation states talking about it and potentially doing it, they have such deep pockets where it's fascinating how fast this can grow. And then if you look at, for example, Google Trends and see how the retail crowd is currently interested in Bitcoin, we are very low. Like if you look at 2017, I think we had like 30% or 25% of the levels of 2017. So we didn't even hit any FOMO levels, any trigger points in the retail crowd. All the price appreciation right now is because institutions are buying it, not the retail crowd is buying. Once we reach higher prices and institutions are buying it, nation states are flirting with it, and then the retail crowd also gets activated in a similar way than we had 2017, we can easily rip through 200, 300,000. It's okay. Like most people come into Bitcoin because of the speculation or because of like, oh, like maybe I get rich this year. Once you get there and you researched it, you're like, okay, I should look at that at least 4 to 5 years. Like I should not come in here to get the rewards in like a half a year or like 1 year. I always say like, be in this for 5 years and try to study and research it in this coming 5 years as much as possible. And I can almost guarantee you that at the end of the 5 years, you will not only be a lot wealthier, you will also not sell at all, because all of a sudden you understand Bitcoin and you really understand where this mission is going. So after 5 years, we probably will say like, oh, like let's be another 10 years or let's be another 20 years in that. If you have 0 Bitcoin right now and you have a lot of other investments, maybe have 5% in the Bitcoin for the next 5 years and just don't touch it. Just study how to store it, because that's really important part. You don't want to lose it. You don't want to be rug pulled or anything like that. And then just leave it there. And every 2 months, study some podcasts, some books, some whatever and get into the game. So that's what I usually try to get to people. Like, if you only, the whole theory that I talk to you now with the financialization in a singularity monetary assets with Bitcoin, if you only believe me with 3%, maybe put 3% of your money into Bitcoin and wait 5 years. And see how research and education evolves your thinking around Bitcoin, and maybe those 3% come to 5, 6, 7%. And you're like, oh, like this can actually happen. And that now this is happening. And you see the progress of Bitcoin, and you see that vision kind of getting fulfilled towards the singularity of money. But I believe the theory is so strong that I've put everything in there. But if you think like, oh, that there's maybe a 1-2% chance that this happens, even if there's like a 1% chance, you should put a little bit in there because it might happen. And you don't want to be on the other side. You don't want to be the last person on the Titanic, still on the Titanic and not having anything in Bitcoin. So that's always why I'm like, if you have Bitcoin, you're already better than 99% of the people. If you have no Bitcoin, you are unfortunately in that 99% bracket. And the longer you wait, the worse it gets. When I started buying Bitcoin, it was under 10K. Now it's under 100K. If you wait long enough, you will not get it under 1 million. Yes, it always makes sense to adopt Bitcoin because it's a better monetary system. You will always benefit from it. But how much you benefit shrinks over time. So we're still early. It's still a huge potential in front of us. But it's better to buy Bitcoin at 100K than at 1 million. And it's better to buy Bitcoin at 1 million than at 10 million. That's what I'm usually trying to get at. Study it, get some exposure. And if it actually does not work out and you put 1% of your assets in there, do you really care that you lost 1% of your assets? But you gained the upside potentially to have that one asset that everyone is using, and you were amongst the first like a few 100 million people. I think that's kind of worth it.
I agree with you that it's better to start. I think I will start today. Really, it's super easy. That's what allows you and me and all the podcasters being open-minded people. When we get some idea that sounds good, why not to implement it immediately? That's the core idea. While you were talking, I thought about that. Okay, I can consider Bitcoin as a, let's say, S&P 500, not as a gold. Because the best strategy is to buy some of the, S&P 500 every week or every month. And now we can do it with the Bitcoin. This is very interesting. Because in the long term, and what's more interesting, that you need to learn how to store it, how to hold it, the key point.
A lot of people lost their Bitcoin along the way because the exchange got just vanished. They didn't take Bitcoin seriously because they bought Bitcoin at like $10, and then those Bitcoin got onto some computer. By the way, when you talk about S&P 500 companies, that's really interesting. MicroStrategy, the company that adopted a Bitcoin strategy, and they have a business going on, but the business is not as exciting as they are holding Bitcoin. They outperformed every single S&P 500 company. They outperformed even NVIDIA and Palantir, the big ones, just simply by buying and holding Bitcoin. They also outperform Bitcoin because they have Bitcoin, they can leverage Bitcoin because they are a company, and they can reinvest their profits into Bitcoin. So obviously they are stronger than Bitcoin and developing faster on Bitcoin, which is super interesting to see. One thing also interesting for people that want to get more Bitcoin with altcoins, it might be possible that the altcoin season that a lot of people are talking about is not happening this time. There's some charts actually showing the early signs of that, where you have the market capitalization of all the crypto projects and the market capitalization on Bitcoin. And for the first time ever, the market capitalization is moving up in Bitcoin, but staying flat or going down in the crypto projects. Since a couple of months, this is actually happening because all the big institutions like MicroStrategy and those companies, they are only buying Bitcoin. They're not buying any other projects. And with the institutions having a lot of money, it might actually happen that the Bitcoin and the rest of cryptos kind of get decoupled from that. So in the past, it was always true that with altcoins, you could make more Bitcoins when you invested at the starting of the bull market, exited at the top of the bull market, and reinvested that into Bitcoin directly for the bear market, because Bitcoin doesn't go down as much as altcoins, but altcoins go up faster than Bitcoin. But these cycles might actually change. Like, don't just do it because it was always like that in the past. And there's early signs of that decoupling happening because institutions are buying Bitcoin and not buying any other altcoins, that it actually might be a bad idea this time around. I could be wrong, I could be right, I don't know the future, obviously, but it's just something to keep in mind. Just because it's happening the last 15 years doesn't mean the next 15 years it will also happen like that.
Rob, what else I can get except of Bitcoin from your side?
I'm a swimmer. I like swimming. I was really good professional swimmer in Austria. I was even on national level, quite good. I'm 2 meters tall, so swimming is a natural thing for me. I'm really passionate about building the podcast, building the media company that I'm currently doing, which is really cool because 1.5 years ago, I had no clue about anything. Now I have a podcast with around 50 to 100,000 people watching every month. So that's really cool. I can all of a sudden make a living out of my passion. I was a normal employee. I had a normal job as an account manager at a IT security company. And all of a sudden, I'm making more on my own with my business than before as my employment. So I'm really passionate about, like, how do you get your first company and your first employee now, because that's just where I'm currently at. And I might share some of my learnings along the way when I do those successfully. That's where I'm currently at. I'm a really family-rooted person. I believe in like the strong family unit of like your wife, your kids, your parents. I think like a family should always be the number one thing in your life, even more important than Bitcoin, if you even if you believe me. What other topics are really exciting for me? Sports with swimming, the family unit as something really important for your life. And then building out businesses. I'm 26, I'm young. I started my first business now with 25, and I'm building that out now. So I'm trying the best to find my place in the world and find my passions. And with Bitcoin, I found the first really good one where I can also work in and do my full-time job there and build my first business. So I'm really thankful and grateful also for all the things that I got. And I'm trying to put on one thing also with that. I'm really big on proof of work. So I'm putting in a lot of work, putting a lot of proof of doing that to get what you really want to have. So that's why I do it every day. Nobody else does that. I could do a really high quality podcast also like once a week, but a lot of people doing a really good high quality podcast once a week. Nobody else, I still have found nobody, even outside of Bitcoin and crypto, that does a single podcast every day with a different interview guest every day. There are some people that do solo episodes every day. That's kind of where what else we could go down and get from me.
Yeah, thanks for this conversation. So guys, we're finished. Thanks for watching. And remember that always do what you love, because you are the only person that can do it.